The Shame of Chester Prynne. Chapter 4, Requiem for a Nose. October 24th, 2015 at 9:30 a.m. Yorkshire, Grey Place, London. Should someone call 999? At first, the sounds of sinus-clearing exertions sound no different than any normal morning shower. I become worried when the nose blowing is joined by high-pitched shrieks of pain, and finally in a crescendo of a high-pitched scream. I push the door open and immediately notice the blood splatter on the glass shower door and small pools of blood and mucus painting the shower floor. Lying on the floor in front of the toilet, he holds onto the porcelain tightly in a fetal-like position. He is as white as the porcelain, making it appear as though the toilet and he are attempting to become one. His eyes are staring down into the toilet bowl, seeking in vain to conjure back up what he had just laid to rest. Somewhere in the vast sewage system of London are the remains of his nose. Not his whole nose, of course, but a sizable chunk of flesh and light cartilage that once was his nasal septum, or significant portion thereof, had been unceremoniously extricated, finally free of the abuse inflicted by the nearly constant snorting of cocaine. If you had been acquainted with my friend, either distantly or intimately only a few years ago, you would doubt whether I can be trusted as a reliable narrator. The person known to us up until he was nearly 40 years old was someone who had not only never used an illegal drug, he was a person deeply repulsed by the very idea. To be raised in his generation means being scared straight by the likes of Nancy Reagan's shrill cries to just say no. The ubiquitous advertisements with the egg cracked into a hot frying pan. This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. But mostly having to listen to baby boomer parents regale you with stories about their rebellious youth in the 60s. Gross. This is how an entire generation would grow up to look more like Alex P. Keaton and less like Bob Dylan. Youth of every generation are rebellious, but those who came of age in the 1980s were an awfully reactionary bunch. Their rebellion was not against adults and adult behavior, but rather against how their hippie parents behaved when they were children. Fear did not deter him, at least not the fear that all those public service announcements sought to instill. His carefully curated self-image was simply incompatible with being associated with the persona of someone who used drugs. He never gave much thought, and therefore was never particularly afraid of the physical and mental consequences he was now ravaged by. But he was afraid of what it would say about the kind of person he wanted so desperately to be. The fear that successfully deterred him from touching drugs for 4 decades was far more powerful, a fear of what others might think. Before his introduction and rapid descent into the bizarre underground world of chemsex, my friend was proving himself a quick study, a prodigy in fact, in the use of a more pedestrian illicit drug. My friend discovered the medicinal powers of cocaine almost as soon as we arrived in London. Less than a year later, an innocent attempt to overcome a crippling depression has now claimed a piece of his anatomy. As his closest friend and witness to these events, I can attest to his inability to do anything half-assed. He looks over at me, and in spite of the scene we're surrounded by, he smiles. He assures me all is well and says, "If Stevie Nicks can live without that useless piece of flesh for all these years, then I'm in good company. And hey, that constant throbbing behind my skull, I think it might be gone. My sinuses work again." He picks himself off the floor and gets back in the shower to clean up and expunge the last bit of evidence of the morning he flushed part of his anatomy down the toilet. Less than 30 minutes later, he is perfecting the half-Windsor knot that will protrude widely from his stiffly starched collar, and combing his hair one last time before rushing out the sliding glass door and up the steep, narrow staircase to the alleyway. As he rushes across the street to the tube station, he still forgets the direction of oncoming traffic, to be greeted with the familiar retort of the horn and scream from an angry commuter. After descending underground by way of the slowest lift in London, he hears the familiar announcement by the friendly voice of TfL.
Northern Line train to Morden by way of Charing Cross.
And looks for that precise spot of the platform he knows the odds are greatest he'll catch the train with the most open seats. I'm not sure how much he's taken this morning, but lately his paranoia is already in high gear by the time he's begun his workday. Paranoia is perhaps too strong a word. Riding on the tube, however, has become increasingly stressful for my friend, the newly minted drug addict. All the strange and smelly people tightly packed together are all staring at the very conspicuous signs of his illicit drug use. How can anyone not notice the constant drip of cloudy mucus flowing from his newly deformed nose down to his lip, the persistent sniffling, the pupils dilated so wide to hide any color from his eyes? They surely are already passing a message down the carriage to the nearest bobby, who will at any moment search his person to find his daily ration of cocaine. A quantity that will consign him to the category of a South American drug lord, as declared in front of the magistrate at the courts of justice, which happened to be right next to his office. The office he is now standing in front of to begin another day of mastering the art of appearing to be very busy with very important work. On behalf of very important clients he's always in a rush to meet with. His actual vocation is as relevant to our story now as it was to him at the time. He understood the risk he was taking by leaving behind a wildly successful career to try something new, somewhere new. Only 1 year into that wager, he looks into the mirror to recoil at the reflection of failure itself. Being forced to confront the question of who he really was if he wasn't succeeding at work is exactly how he ended up where he found himself, which is at present sitting in the darkest stall in the very back of the men's lavatory, pouring line after line of white powder on the top of the toilet paper dispenser. These days, he doesn't bother returning back to his desk. This little nook seems far safer and is where he now spends the majority of the day, or however long he decides to remain at work.